Trying to form an objective opinion on this game has proven to be a really difficult thing to do, especially since I'm a huge fan of the original version, and let's be honest here, nostalgia goggles can sometimes be worse than beer goggles. One of my biggest concerns before even making this video was debating whether or not it was too soon to truly evaluate this game. However, I truly believe that this game deserves to be examined based off the magnitude of the legacy that it holds. And taking into consideration the fact that this is still the first part of the remake, I've decided to not form an opinion on the story just yet, since that will ultimately just lead to theory crafting, and that's something I want to stay away from because that's not going to age too well. With that being said, I'll be focusing on the gameplay and the overall mechanics that comprise the gameplay loop. There are 6 things you'll be focused on during a playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and for the purpose of this video, I'm going to disregard the very first on the list, so let's dive right into it. During the development cycle of this game, one of my biggest questions was how are they going to evolve the turn-based combat? Although I'm a huge fan of JRPGs, turn-based combat has always been a topic of debate, and in my opinion, I don't believe that turn-based combat ages that well, especially when we have the technology and the game engines to create something more dynamic.
No thanks. It's fine just the way it is.
What, you some kind of purist?
For this game, you're able to see the culmination of all the different battle mechanics that came before it. It takes the essence of the ATB bar from the original and adds additional mechanics borrowed from Final Fantasy XIII in the form of the stagger mechanic and the action RPG type of gameplay from Final Fantasy XV. However, one of the biggest downsides to the gameplay is the lack of a jump button. Air combat is extremely rigid, and it sends the characters and camera flying in all sorts of directions. It seems like a large oversight from the developers, considering there are multiple instances of flying enemies who go out of range for normal attacks, and if you don't happen to have the right materia equipped for the spells, then you'll just have to wait for them to return. I'm hoping this is something they can rectify in the next game. It just feels like a really weird area to leave out. In order to keep things fresh, there are 2 instances of motorcycle combat. Although I appreciate the attempt from the developers to add variety, these are basically all on rails and essentially scripted. The vehicle actually turns for you, and the rubber banding effect only works once the enemy has gone through their attack animations. I want to backtrack a little bit here and speak about the camera. The default camera is way too close to Cloud. This may be fine for one-on-one battles, but when you're battling hordes of enemies, you'll actually have a very hard time seeing what's around you and you'll get hit from a direction where you have no idea what's going on. I set the camera back to the furthest it can go and it worked a lot better for me. The combat itself can be really fun and engaging and allows you to macro shortcuts to the controller for different character actions. This will allow players to treat this more as an action-oriented game. The combat seems like an interesting hybrid of a fast-paced game like Kingdom Hearts, yet the ATB really allows it to obtain some of the original charm. An additional mechanic which I think they could have added to increase the depth of the combat is a parry mechanic, similar to Dark Souls. However, I know there's going to be a bunch of memes saying not everything has to be Dark Souls, but it could have taken the game one step further, and I'm really curious to see what type of improvements they'll make for the next iteration. I was largely disappointed with the way they handled equipment in this game. You have 3 slots, one for your weapon, one for your armor, and one for your accessory. Your weapon and armor have materia slots, and your weapon can actually gain additional slots by utilizing some of your SP as you upgrade your weapons. The amount of weapons for each character is way too low, and they're already preset in a way that makes it obvious on the class type it focuses on and provides less interchangeability. Now, let's speak about the actual materia. The way materia works is reminiscent of the original version. You gain AP through winning battles, and it levels up the materia, which lets you dish out more powerful versions of the spells. You can also link support materia together for some interesting combinations, like linking Cure with Magnify, and you can heal your entire party with just one spell. The biggest downside to materia is that there just isn't enough of them. Now, I'm not sure if this was due to the lack of memory, or if the developers just don't want to allow you to become too powerful in this game since it's still just the first part of the remake. The game should also allow you to save different material combinations for each character due to the amount of times you actually switch between party members. Now, I want to take this time to actually speak about Assess. Assess materia is actually mandatory for fights to identify weaknesses, so it will always take up one spot. In my honest opinion, this shouldn't have been a materia, but instead a battle mechanic built into the combat itself. It makes no difference if this was removed, except you would free up one additional slot, which can be crucial for tough fights. The graphics in this game are very hit or miss. The character models actually look incredible, and yet the textures in the environment look like they're stretched out JPEG images, especially in Chapter 6 when you're overlooking Sector 7. You're supposed to have this feeling of understanding what you're fighting for. However, this can totally ruin your immersion when you're exploring these landscapes. The game is also bogged down by some terrible load screens where your character starts to go through tight spaces while it loads the next part of the level. This was obviously done to hide loading screens, and I'm hoping this can be rectified in the next installment with the PS5 hardware. There are 26 side quests in total. There are 6 in Chapter 3, 6 in Chapter 8, 5 in Chapter 9, and 9 in Chapter 14. A few of these side quests result in more character development, and some of these actually influence future scenes, although minor in changes. However, they're all primarily fall into 2 main categories. They're either fetch quests or they're combat based, and they have a huge shift in tonality that just doesn't do the game justice and makes you suspend your belief about the characters having very time sensitive matters to take care of. However, they stop to help someone find lost cats, for example. I understand the devs want to provide additional context for the players, and especially after the complaints about Final Fantasy XIII being way too linear. Throughout the course of the game, I made sure to get all of these out of the way so I was able to obtain the best possible outcome for future scenarios, but it always felt like such a chore. The minigames consist of darts, whack-a-box, squats, and pull-ups. I won't be going into the Coliseum as a minigame since it's more battle-oriented. These are all fine in nature, however, I really think they should have allowed us to play these at the title screen, or at least have fast travel access towards them. If I want to play darts, for example, I have to replay through all of Chapter 3 until I get to 7th Heaven. This leads me to the quality of life improvements. There are a few things I believe the developers can implement for the next iteration to really help make this remake be the best it can be. For example, in reference to my minigames comment about allowing us to access it through the title screen, they should allow us to have various checkpoints within a chapter that we can have instant access to, so we don't have to play through the entire thing. In addition to that, they should have a boss rush mode, similar to the Coliseum, except this would allow you to play against the bosses in the story mode. Ultimately, the game's mechanics don't do anything exceptionally well, but they serve as a reminder for the game that came before it. I'm hopeful for the next installment, but I fear that they started it a little bit too soon in the development cycle since it started in the fall of 2019, so it may limit their capacity to implement any feedback from fans after the release of this first part. We have no choice but to wait and see, but I'm generally excited in the direction that they're taking this remake.